there heat between the Paul brothers? And I ask you that because when you're dealing with carnies, when you're dealing with guys that are constant workers, you never know what's real and what's not. In professional wrestling, they used to even draw a distinction. They showed honor to the term shoot. If a professional wrestler said this is a shoot, there was an honor in that for a period of time that meant I'm going to tell you straight, I'm dropping the character, I'm dropping the gimmick, I'm setting kayfabe aside. But the shoot is the new work, right? A work is where you're working, you're a carny, you're storytelling. A shoot is where you're telling the truth, just to draw those distinctions there. But the shoot became the new work. And when you're dealing with the Paul brothers that are full-time carnies, you never know what's real. But I'm bringing this to you because Jake Paul has said about Logan Paul, okay, not only did he say he would fight him, and then he said, well, I'm not going to fight him because he's my brother, but I have no question I would whip him. I mean, those are kind of tough words, particularly coming from the younger brother. Older brother can get away with it. When younger brother does it, it's a little bit weird, particularly when if you were to guess it's true, Jake would beat Logan. Oh, and by the way, Logan never responded at all. Like, I mean, he's acting like the puppy that missed the paper. So it's one of these things where you go, okay, this looks like there might be a little bit of heat here. And now Jake Paul has come out saying that Logan Paul versus Mayweather makes no sense and is bad for the sport. So now he's directly reaching into the pocket of his brother, who, by the way, got a fight that Jake was after and possibly is jealous, or you're dealing with a couple of carnies. I don't know. I'm legitimately asking you for your opinion, and would have to be just that. You're not going to have insight, right? When you have two guys that aren't real guys, they're just images. You're never going to get through that. You're never going to find out. But there's always something comical about a guy who's not part of a sport, just really wants to be. He's on the outside looking in, and he starts using terms like our sport. This is bad for our sport. I can personalize this. I remember when I was making my run, and I was doing it very, very specifically different than other guys. There was trash talk at a time that this was about honor. All these things that are a bunch of crap that don't live today because I came in and changed the game. And yes, I will take credit for that. Good, bad, or indifferent, but I'm the one that did it. At the time, I had guys. I can remember one guy specifically who's a friend of mine to this day, so I'm not going to say his name, but I remember he had 2 fights, and he had done an interview about me before we became friends, and he said, I think what Chael does makes our sport look bad. And I remember looking around going, I've done this 18 times over 11 years. What's our sport? What is our sport? You borrowed a cup and a mouthpiece at the dog park 2 times? I've done this 18 times for 3 world championships. What our sport? We're not in the same sport. But I had multiple other people that tried to do that as well, including fans. There was a writer named Josh Gross who used to bury me all the time, and he would always talk about, well, I can't believe my sport is like this. I can't believe this. I'm kind of looking around going, Josh, you're not part of this sport, man. You're on the outside looking in, and you're a useful pawn at times that's going to write articles in a direction that the worker wants you to write the article. You're not part of the sport. And I don't mean that to be against Josh. I'm just sharing for you that narrative is out there. And for Paul, who's done 2 gimmick matches, to act as though this is his sport. He isn't sacrificed. He isn't put in time. He didn't come up through the Golden Gloves. He would not do those things. If he wanted to show an honor to the sport and go enter the local Golden Gloves and come up through the ranks like everybody else, I'm not having a conversation about this. This is a business venture. I like the way he's going about it. He jumped into a sport that has a history of a lack of integrity. It has a lack of integrity to the extent that the government had to step in and regulate it. The government, if you're in a communist country, we're having a different conversation. Within a democratic society, there is no sport in the history of time that has been regulated by the government except boxing because it was so damn dirty. So you're talking about a sport who everything they do is bad, and now you have something bad because your brother got a fight that you won. It's just a very bizarre comment. It's a very bizarre lack of interperspective to make believe that you're in a sport that you're not part of. You just want to be part of. And you're calling out guys who have never even done the sport as a way of doing the sport yourself. His next 2 call-outs, Ben Askren and Dylan, are guys that have never done it. So he's talking about our sport, trying to bring attention and bring athletes into a sport that have never done it. What do you mean our sport? A very weird concept. And if you're dealing with a carny, well, then he got me. He did a good job. He got a reaction from it. That's all he's looking for. But if I'm not dealing with a carny and this is the real guy, we got to sit down and look at the man in the mirror right here. Very baffling statement. And when you do look at the history of boxing, this is a sport that I love, by the way. I consider myself a boxer. I have gotten in the ring with boxing gloves and boxed. I've done that. I've spent my time in the gym. I feel as though I have a right to also look at the sport and criticize it for what it is. There is a failure of leadership in boxing to the highest of levels. The first thing that boxing failed at is making it unacceptable to lose. Because boxing leadership failed at making it acceptable to have defeats. That's where all the corruption came from. I mean, that largely is what you can stem back to the root of all of its problems. Getting dirty managers in there, making matches that make absolutely no sense, getting people to sign off with them so you can run some guy's record up to 20-0 and he can go fight for a world championship, even though he sucks, but he's got a beautiful record. And that's what the sport was based on. There was no competitive architecture. That's where the guys who came through the Olympics have had such a hard time breaking into the pros. Because all the pros are looking around going, man, this is a real fighter. This is an actual talented guy who proved his worth. I'm a guy that's doing it in the back room on some paper because I got a good build. I got a good build, a good manager who works with other corrupt managers and get their fights in there. I mean, this is what it is. If boxing had ever made its sport acceptable to have defeats, every sport has defeats. The NCAA glosses right over it. You get down to the Final Four, they're praised. You get down to a bowl game, they're praised. Not one of those teams is ever undefeated in either sport, in basketball or football. You get into baseball, baseball is so acceptable for losing, they'll go to Game 7 of the World Series. So the guy that they crowned world champion lost 3 days ago. Not just he lost somewhere in his career, he lost on Tuesday. And is holding a plaque up that says world champion on Friday. I'm not insulting that, I'm complimenting that. That's what real competition is. Real competitors get beat. Anybody that's walking around with a 400-0 record has rigged the system. It's one of those things. There is no sport if there isn't competition. There's no way to say you're in a competitive field if you're not getting beat. So it's a major miss by boxing, but that's what ties into a large part of the corruption. Is the leadership in boxing make believing that a boxer can never get beat, even though baseball players, football players, Olympians, the best athletes in the world all get beat. Tiger Woods loses many times a year. Serena loses. LeBron loses 18, 20, 25 times. If you know when to win, if you win when it's important to win, you can chalk that up to I was peaking, I was preparing. Everybody will gobble up the story because guess what? It's true. If you come into something, you're 25-0, you're 29-0, you're in a fake sport.